Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm Danny, also known as Danielle Boker, and in today's video we're going over my role as a third culture individual and what that even means and some of the pros and cons of being a third culture individual. So this video will be split up into 3 parts after this little introduction thingy. First part will be what even is a third culture individual. Stick around for that if you don't know. If you already know, the second part will be me as a third culture individual. Why am I a third culture individual? And the third part will be some of the pros and cons that I've come across as a third culture individual. So if you're interested at all, stick around, leave a little comment, like and subscribe, all that good stuff. But let's get right into it. I'm gonna move how I'm sitting. So what is a third culture individual? Well, I've got a few notes here about the history of the term. It was first coined by June and Ruth Useem, I think it's pronounced, in the 1950s, and it was first used by Ruth after her second year-long visit to India with her husband and 3 children. In literature, she said, "In summarizing that which we had observed in our cross-cultural encounters, we began to use the term third culture as a generic term to cover styles of life created, shared, and learned by the persons who are in the process of relating their societies or sections thereof to each other." The term third culture kids, or TCKs, was coined to refer to the children who accompany their parents into another society. Now, I don't know how to pronounce this name, K. Brannaman Eakin, former education counselor for the United States Department of State, describes a TCK as someone who, as a child, has spent a significant period of time in one or more cultures other than his or her own, thus integrating elements of those cultures and their own birth culture into a third culture. So what does this really mean? Basically, if you've spent a significant chunk of your childhood in a home country that was not your parents' home country, well done, you're a third culture kid or a third culture individual. So let's move on to part 2. Why am I a third culture individual? So why am I a third culture kid? Well, I don't have any notes on this, but I'm just going to yap for a bit to explain it to you. So I'm a third culture kid because when I was younger, I moved from my passport and parents' home country to a little island in Asia called Taiwan. I spent the majority of my childhood there and grew up there until I was almost an adult, then moved to the UK where I live now. What does that mean? It means that I have some Dutch culture from where my parents are from and where I lived as a kid before I moved, some Taiwanese culture, and some British culture, all smushed up into a third culture that is my own. As they say, I'm a citizen of the world. So what are some of the pros and cons of being a third culture kid? Let me get into it. Let's start with the pros, shall we? First pro that I put down in my little list of notes on my phone is that you do pick up languages much easier as a third culture kid. If you move to another country and they don't speak the language that you've learned before you moved, if you moved before a certain age or move for a certain amount of time, you're going to pick up the language pretty quickly. For me, that was learning English because I went to an English school. But I also learned a bit of Mandarin whilst I was in Taiwan, and my Dutch is still really good. So it's easier for me to pick up even another language. In Taiwan, I also did some German and some French at one point. It wasn't too hard because I already had that part of my brain activated of learning languages. Another pro is the fact that, for me anyways, I was able to go on holidays to different countries that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to go to. So for me, that looked like going to Australia and Malaysia and Thailand when I was really young, which I wouldn't have been able to do if we'd lived in the Netherlands, because A, it's very far away, and B, it's more expensive to travel from those countries. Yeah, it made me more appreciative of the world and really set off that travel bug in me about wanting to see the world and wanting to explore. And yeah, also another pro I have is because I lived in a different country and I went to an international school, I now have friends all over the world, which means that I have places to stay all over the world if I wanted to go on holiday there. A few years ago I visited a friend in Finland, for example. That's really cool, is just to have their perspective, but also to have that like little holiday spot and like be able to share this very special connection with people in different countries and have them come over to you as well, because yeah, my friend from Finland also came over last year, I think it was. Yeah, and be able to show them around somewhere they've never been before, or they show you around where you've never been before. Pretty cool. And overall, I think another pro is I feel like I'm a more well-rounded and open-minded person overall, because I had to be. because I learned so much about different cultures. I learned so much about different ways of thinking and perspectives and the way the world works in different countries. And yeah, I think because of that, I had to learn a lot of skills around communication and even non-verbal communication, but also learned a lot about how the world is perceived by different people. And so I had to be more open-minded, which is a good thing. And yeah, became more well-rounded. And I wouldn't be the person I am today if I hadn't moved. And I think I wouldn't want to be the person that hadn't moved. I feel like I'm a much more tolerant person, a much more excitable person, a much more travel hungry person, and more adventurous person because of everything that I've experienced. And I wouldn't want to miss out on that in any other life. But there are, of course, cons to being a third culture individual as well. One of them is, of course, missing family and friends all the time. You're always away from at least one of your family members or friends, and you're always at least missing one of them, usually more than one. And unfortunately, it's just not possible to see them very often all the time. Sometimes you don't have the money or the time, work schedules clash. Sometimes they live in the opposite end of the world and you just cannot visit that for whatever reason. And so you're always missing someone. You're always, grieving a relationship that could have gone a certain way if you hadn't moved. And that's always really sad and really hard, but I will give tips on how to cope with that in a future video, I think. One of the other cons I've come across is that when I was younger, I didn't move very quickly. I lived in Taiwan for about 10 years. But because I went to an international school, a lot of my friends left within a year or two, sometimes maximum of 3 years usually, which meant that I constantly had to make new friends and constantly had to say goodbye to people I was just getting close to, and that's really hard and really sad. And there were moments where I was like, I'm not going to make any more friends. Of course, it's impossible to live a life without friends, so I made new friends, but it hurt. It hurt like hell. One of the things I also found really hard was not being able to see the youngest ones in my family grow up. When I lived in Taiwan, my aunt had a baby and I was really excited and I really wanted to get to know this kid and see him grow up. But of course, living so far away, you miss all the important moments in their life and you're just not really a part of it. And that's okay, but it also really sucks. And I think the biggest con for me anyway, to being a third culture individual is that I don't really have a sense of home. When someone says, where do you feel at home? I actually got asked that question the other day and I was like, I don't know, because I don't really remember what it was like to live in the Netherlands, but I do consider myself Dutch. But I also lived in Taiwan for a very long time, but that doesn't feel like home because my Mandarin isn't that good and I haven't lived there a long time and my parents aren't from there and I'm not quite from that culture. I don't really fit in there either. And now I'm in the UK, but does this feel like home? When I'm feeling good, yes, but on certain days I do miss other countries a lot as if they were home. So I don't know. I don't know what home is. Right now I'd say it's my partner. But other than that, a place, I can't really call a place home. And that's really something I really struggled with identity-wise for a very, very long time. I'll do another video on what home means to me, I think, and another video on the pros and cons if you want to see that based on some research I can do. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please comment any other video ideas if you have any. I'll see you in the next one.